Guys, just the picture alone from the thumbnail is hard to look at.
Football is an integral part of British culture. If horse racing is the sport of kings, then football is the sport of the people, with millions flooding stadiums every weekend to cheer on their heroes. During the 1984-85 season,
Alright, I know it's a very serious video, but I gotta give the man props on the beard.
Bradford City had given their supporters plenty to cheer about. The atmosphere at their final game being one of celebration, but over the course of 4 short minutes, things would take a dramatic turn for the worse and end in tragedy. In today's episode of Well I Never, the story of the 1985 Bradford City Stadium fire. An incident largely considered to be amongst the worst disasters in the history of British football.
Wow.
Founded in 1903, Bradford City Football Club was initially extremely successful, getting promoted in 1908 and winning the FA Cup in 1911. Over the years, the club had many ups and downs, promotions and relegations, and tragically the death of their manager, Grenville Hare, in 1964. Him passing away after suffering a heart attack during training. By the early 1980s, the club found itself in deep financial distress, which came to a head in 1983 when the entire club was put up for sale. Fortunately, it was purchased by someone close to home, its former chairman, Stafford Higginbotham, who bought it alongside former board member Jack Tordoff. Under their leadership and that of player-manager Trevor Cherry, Bradford City Football Club was able to begin anew, knitting together a 13-game unbeaten run, which included 10 wins. This saw them top Division 3, with them clinching the title in the penultimate game of the season, a 2-0 win over Bolton Wanderers. During this period, the club played at the Valley Parade Stadium, which was originally designed as a rugby ground but was revamped in 1908. It hadn't been touched since then, which meant that the entire venue was antiquated, ramshackle, and practically ancient. In the book 56, The Story of the Bradford Fire, author Martin Fletcher described the inside of the Valley Parade Stadium. The seats themselves were effectively claret-painted planks of wood, suspended and supported by blocks of wood at either end and divided by steel markers into individual bench seats. The markers and end blocks...
So with it being mostly constructed of wood, man, that's going to make the fire even more awful, man.
Were nailed to some sturdy-looking wooden floorboards that had been laid over wooden sleepers set into the valley. Many hated the rickety stadium, and the renowned football ground writer Simon Inglis even saying that the view from the stand was like watching football from the cockpit of a Sopwith Camel. Knowing that their home stadium wasn't particularly well liked, Bradford City Football Club proposed several drastic changes, including the installation of timber seats, new stairwells, and a press room, among other things. These proposals were so grand that their advisors projected the team's budget for the next 3 seasons would be completely consumed. It was for a good cause, though, and so the plans, despite their astronomical price tag, were given a seal of approval. But unfortunately for Bradford City Football Club, their lack of modernisation before now would have a much higher cost. May the 11th, 1985, and Bradford City was set to play their final game of the season against Lincoln City. With the title already sealed, this match was set to be a chance for their fans to celebrate with the team. On that Saturday, the crowd reportedly numbered at least 11,000, mostly there to see Bradford lift the trophy. On the pitch, however, perhaps because the players knew the hard work was already done, the match sat at 0-0 as half-time approached, with neither team looking like scoring. Things began to take a more interesting turn at around 3:44 p.m, but it was for all the wrong reasons. A few people in the crowd began to notice a trail of white smoke rising from one of the seating sections. Not knowing how severe the situation was about to get, a group of fans began to chant, "Bradford's burning, Bradford's burning. Fetch the engines, fetch the engines."
That's another thing that's so crazy, how quickly These songs, that's something that in the football culture that I've just started to really pick up on is just, and maybe it's just the British culture, but, or maybe it's just football culture. I don't know, but like how quickly the English chants get started and the songs that they start singing. It's like, that's so clever, and it's literally just a response to something that's happening at the moment. That's pretty crazy to me.
Later, TV commentator John Helms stated that the smoke had been caused by an Australian tourist whose lit cigarette had accidentally dropped in between the floorboards. He and his son had fetched a steward to resolve the situation, but it was too late. The debris and trash that had accumulated in the space had already been ignited. It wasn't long before the wisps of smoke turned into outright flames. A fire extinguisher was called for, but there was none in the stadium. This, combined with the stadium's rickety...
There was no fire extinguisher in the stadium? A stadium that's constructed almost entirely of wood? Or constructed of almost entirely wood? And there's no fire extinguisher. How'd you miss this one? Like, I don't know.
Structure and the mountain of garbage underneath the stand served to exacerbate the blaze, which quickly spread to the roof and other seating sections of the wooden stadium. According to eyewitness Paul Firth, once the black smoke had come in, you couldn't see anything, but you could hear screams. You could hear people trying to kick at solid doors to get out, trying to escape from whatever route they could. I made the decision to go over the seats and climb down to the pitch. A police officer was shouting at us to get onto the pitch, partly to clear the way for others, but also because the heat was so intense. With more than 10,000 people panicking and trying to escape, the situation immediately turned into chaos. This was made even worse when molten tar began to drip from the roof, lighting clothing and skin alike. Many also found themselves crushed by the crowd, which had surged upwards to the back of the seating stands where the exit doors were. Others had fled downwards towards the pitch, where the absence of a perimeter fence made it possible to reach safety. Many experts believed that this was the reason why the death toll was relatively low despite the magnitude of the fire and the subsequent stampede. Had there been a barrier, the casualties would have likely been in the hundreds or even thousands. Needless to say, the fire was incredibly devastating. In the space of 4 minutes, it had turned the entire stadium into a deadly inferno that ultimately claimed the lives of 56 people, several of whom were children. Among them were 13-year-old Felix and 11-year-old Rupert Greenwood, both of whom had been ushered away by a parking enforcement officer who sought to keep them safe from the fire by draping his tunic over them. They never made it out though. When their bodies were found, the two boys were still nestled under the thick overcoat, seemingly fast asleep. The death toll also included 64-year-old Nellie Foster, the grandmother
of the 9-year-old
Carl Hepton, whom she had saved by lowering him down towards the seats and urging him to run. He was able to reunite with his father, whose ticket had placed him in a seating stand far away from the fire. Later, Carl recalled that everywhere was red hot. My scalp was in pain from drops of melted tarpaulin, and I had to pull my red ski jacket over my hands to stop them from burning. Rescue attempts were conducted by the local authorities, along with the fire survivors who tried their best to aid those who were injured. The Bradford City team also helped evacuate the crowd, with coach Terry Urith leading people onto the pitch while players, including John Hawley, led fans to an exit. The fire department arrived at the scene 4 minutes after they were called. However, the rickety stadium had been easily consumed by the blaze. By the time they got to work, they were already facing massive flames and dense smoke, which, combined with the thousands of people still inside the venue, hampered their efforts to fight the fire. The main stand of the Valley Parade Stadium had been completely destroyed, with only burnt seats, lamps, and metal fences left behind. Even more horrifying, though, was the fact that some of those who had perished had never even made it out of their seats. Their bodies were found still sitting upright, covered by bits of burning tarpaulin that had fallen from the roof. It took the local police until 4 a.m. the following day before all the bodies were recovered and removed. Many of them had died of smoke inhalation, although some only passed away upon reaching the nearest hospital. Of the 56 fatal casualties, 54 were Bradford City fans, while the remaining 2 were fans of Lincoln City. The oldest victim was the team's former chairman, 86-year-old Sam Firth. More than 265 supporters were also severely injured, with the majority of them rushed to the nearby Bradford Royal Infirmary. The match between Bradford City and Lincoln had been stopped when the fire began to get out of hand. However, the cameras continued to roll, which produced graphic and disturbing images that can still be found online today. While many are unable to stomach watching this footage, it's often used by fire departments to demonstrate how quickly flames can spread, especially in old and antiquated structures. The fire had simply progressed too quickly for anyone to take in, which was why the confusion about the wisps of smoke had turned into chaos and pandemonium within seconds. Their panic was exacerbated by their limited escape options.
These photos are
exit doors and locked
horrifying.
entry turnstiles. The person who dropped his lit cigarette wasn't the only one to blame for what happened. Bradford City were well aware that the Valley Parade Stadium was a huge fire risk. In 1984, a year before the fire, the club had applied for a grant to repair the roof, parts of which had fallen during a match. To support their application, they had called in a structural engineer from the West Yorkshire County Council named Andrew Shaw, who was alarmed by how the main grandstand was built. In his report, he wrote that the unusual construction of this stand makes an appraisal of structural adequacy desirable. The timber construction is a fire hazard, and in particular, there is a build-up of combustible materials in the voids beneath the seats. A carelessly discarded cigarette could give rise to a fire risk.
My word.
Egress from the ground.
How horrifying that a year before this took place, they were warned about this. And the exact scenario is what took place.
Grandstand should be in 2.5 minutes. Andrew Shaw didn't know it then, but his worst fears would tragically come true only a year after he submitted this report. News of the Bradford City Stadium fire sent shockwaves across the world, with notable figures including Queen Elizabeth II, then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, then Chancellor of Germany Helmut Kohl, and even Pope John Paul II sending their condolences and deepest sympathies. Regarded as one of the worst disasters in the history of British football, the grief that this incident had caused continues to be felt, particularly by the survivors of the fire and the families of those who had perished in it. Today, Valley Parade is unrecognisable from the rickety wooden structure it was at the time of the disaster. Save for the original clubhouse that still stands beside the main stand and the flank support wall that runs down the Holywell Ash Lane at the Bradford end, it is a thoroughly modern stadium with room for 25,000 fans. There are several memorials dedicated to the memory of that day, with the main one being made of black marble. Engraved in gold are the names of all those who died on that fateful day in May 1985.
Man. Absolutely horrifying video.